Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. Welcome back to the garden, where we rant and rave about all that's interesting in modern feminism. Tonight, we have Lily Alexandre, a young trans woman who's beginning to realize that material reality does matter after all. Let's watch her insist over and over that material circumstances affect everyone, to pirouette every time and explain why, actually, they don't matter after all. But first, I want to show you some of the stuff I got. Look at it's a frog. And it's a box. Isn't he cute? And I got some lights, some colored lights. Add a little visual interest, you know. And I actually set myself up a tip jar, so maybe I can go get some more fun stuff for us to look at while we hang out and discuss the important issues of the day. It's over at Patreon. The link will be in the description. Like the video if you enjoy this kind of content, to let me and the algorithm both know that. And subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this, because boy, is there plenty out there to go over. But yeah, Lily here is actually going to bring up some important points about capitalism and consumption and identity. And then we're going to get to watch her rationalize them away with what is clearly some great stamina and skill. Okay. I'll be honest, at first I wasn't sure what this term binary trans woman meant. It seems sort of contradictory to me, but she will explain.
It's had something of a resurgence the past few years. This conflict is really nothing new. In fact, it's probably been a source of tension in the trans community about as long as there's been a trans community. We've seen it take many forms over the years. The persecuted true trans versus the attention-seeking trender, the autogynephile versus the homosexual. Despite different specifics, these infights have a lot in common. A false dichotomy is created and used to sort the community. One side declares itself more legitimate and accuses the other of holding the movement back with their differing needs or priorities. There's a push to decenter the opposing camp, who are said to be less persecuted and taking up too much space.
Yeah, that's that purity politics thing that narcissists like to do, right? Where they have to project all of their bad personality traits, or the ones they don't like anyway, onto the rest of the world, and then go and hunt down that enemy that they can just feel is out there. No matter how many of them they weed out and get rid of.
I wrote in my notes Oppression Olympics, which would have been a very timely bit of wordplay if this video came out on time. Clearly that never happens. The deepest of these divides is also the oldest, transsexual versus transgender. The word transgender is used as an umbrella term nowadays.
Yeah, I didn't know this. Apparently transgender used to mean people who just changed their presentation and didn't, go through all the surgeries and whatever. And then she goes on to say that those two words are interchangeable these days. And that's not been my experience at all. My experience has been more oh gosh. My experience has been more that the term transsexual is considered antiquated and borderline offensive these days. Even though 25 years ago, transgender was not a term that existed. This quote is just
signed at birth. Unlike transvestites, but like transsexuals, however, transgenders do not alter the vestimentary coding of their gender only episodically or primarily for sexual gratification. Rather, they consistently and publicly express an ongoing commitment to their claimed gender identity.
Because transsexuals aren't committed, right? Whatever. This quote just obviously makes the transgenders sound so much more superior than the others, obviously.
And then stopped. How do you classify someone who wants hormones but not surgery? And of course, many people wanted no part in this divide to begin with. Your gender politics aren't perfectly predicted by your choice to take hormones. How do you classify a textbook transsexual who doesn't buy into this debate, doesn't identify strongly with either term, and lives in a community with medicalized and non-medicalized alike? She's still on your team?
Okay. This is just an obsession with categorization that everyone in this, cohort seems to share, right? How do I label this? How do I label that? Oh my gosh, labels. I don't know. Life is this sloppy, bitchy mess, right? It has a tendency not to fall into neat categories, and yet we insist on making them anyway because we're human beings and we need frameworks for things.
The years went on, it became increasingly clear that this transsexual-transgender divide isn't as clean a line as we thought. By the 2010s, the distinction had largely been left behind, with both terms still seeing use today, but not really being understood as rigidly defined or mutually exclusive.
Right,
the culture war seemed to be over. The tension that created this divide simmered on. The urge to dispose of one another in the name of progress.
Yes, the tension simmered on because the narcissism continued to go unaddressed.
Resentment stirred by some folks' desire to assimilate. Though the trans community is arguably more unified than it's ever been, this push continues to split us down the middle with a similar tactic as before, taking the choices a person makes, using those choices to assign a person a label, and using that label to assume their political allegiance.
That split that you're talking about is us versus them, which you run into in groups where, people are not acting in bad faith, as Sartre would say, where, they're trying to be who they want to be instead of trying to figure out who they are. I'm pretty sure you would understand what that is I'm talking about right there. Your eyebrows are really sharp, though. Gotta say. Props for that, because I don't have patience for that. Or the time. But anyway. Yeah. Acting in bad faith. You need, when you lack any kind of actual truthful unification of the group without any depth, it's the way to keep cohesion is to unify against an outgroup. And obviously, in order to do that, you need an outgroup.
I think this is what's happening between the binary trans and non-binary camps. There's been an increased delineation between the two sides, an attempt to turn a group as diverse as non-binary people into a coherent ideological bloc, one whose interests are in conflict with those of binary trans people. Where binary trans people are understood to be moderate and assimilationist, non-binary people are portrayed as the radical gender vanguard, challenging norms left and right.
I guess I'll give you that one, right? Because the idea of grouping non-binary people all together in a clump is a bit absurd, because it's defining them by their lack of something, which is, proving a negative is difficult, notoriously, and grouping people together by what they are not, it has a spotty history at best, right?
Binary trans people are understood as privileged and more widely accepted. Non-binary people are understood as a put-upon minority who's more often a target. This seems like a pretty wide gulf, and I can't say I see it reflected in the people I know. The trans people in my life tend to run into similar challenges regardless of gender: rejection from families, medical and legal discrimination, general ignorance. I wouldn't say the trans women I know are meaningfully more privileged than the non-binary people I know, or vice versa. The difference just feels kind of played up.
1,000 apologies. Do forgive me for that little interruption. They can't be helped, unfortunately. Anywhere. But this was so worth it, right? Look at that. Identity is overrated. You don't say.
I think in the trans community and in many progressive spaces, we put too much stock in identity. That's not to say labels are useless. As I've said before, finding language to describe yourself can be life-changing. But treating identity as a perfect predictor for the problems we run into, or framing the whole conversation of oppression around how individuals identify, I feel like it misses a lot. Nearly everything even.
Yes. Correct. That would be the big problem here. Look at you, bringing up big, awesome, great points like that. Because framing conversations about material things like the distribution of resources around how someone feels in their heart does not work and makes no sense. You can feel however you want to feel in your heart. It doesn't matter. It does not affect the fact that you need to eat. And what your dietary restrictions might be. I feel like you can't identify out of, diabetes or celiac disease, right? Like, what is that? It's focusing on the wrong thing is what it is. And you're right, it misses a whole lot. Now, let's see how she spins this into something to explain why, actually, material circumstances don't matter, though.
Because, of course, the driver of transphobia isn't identity alone. How you label yourself does have some impact on how people treat you, but more relevant is how you move through the world, how you look and dress and sound, the steps you take in your transition.
Wait, never mind. Because those would be material facts again.
the people you hang around. Unless you're walking around with a pin on, strangers don't know your deeply felt gender for sure. It often comes down to what people assume about your gender based on how you present yourself.
Ooh.
Julia Serrano, in her seminal book Whipping Girl, calls this process gender.
I love that. Julia Serrano's seminal book.
A lot of note tabs on here. Pretty impressive, right? I can't take credit. I borrowed this from a cis high school teacher like 3 years ago that I never saw him again. Shout out to that guy. True ally.
Oh, man. See this book? I stole it from a guy. Mwah. Thanks, dude.
I woke up one day and realized I was genderqueer. I'm not sure much about my life would change. I wouldn't stop experiencing misogyny or transmisogyny. The way people perceive me would probably stay about the same. Institutions like schools and hospitals wouldn't treat me any differently.
Here comes the big reveal, everybody.
All they care about is that my birth certificate says male and I look like this. They'll make their same assumptions and probably sort me into the same box they would have otherwise. How am I so sure of this? Well, I've privately identified as genderqueer for ages.
Ooh. Ooh. And we had no idea. Wow. I guess.
And in the time since, nothing has changed. Not my relationships, not the discrimination I face, nothing. Why? Because I haven't really told anyone. A couple close friends and now several thousand internet strangers. But other than that, nothing. I haven't.
Okay. So, how you feel in your heart does not affect a damn thing unless you act on it.
Change my pronouns or my gender marker because I'm okay being read as a woman, so I don't feel the need. I may be genderqueer, but I interact with the world the same as many supposedly binary trans women.
Ooh, there's some gobbledygook, right? How does she know how all those people interact with the world? Is she all these people? Has she been each of these people in succession now? You know, because she's gone from being a boy to being a woman, I guess. She identifies herself as a binary trans woman a couple of times and identifies herself as a non-binary person a couple of times. So there's definitely some confusion here. But, you know, there's also obviously been sort of an evolution of things over the years, but not so many years as we will see.
Identity doesn't always line up with your gendering. There are non-binary people who are read as non-binary and as cis men and as cis women and as trans men and as trans women.
Anybody can look like anything. Yeah. But like most men would fit a certain cluster of traits. You know, they would hit most of them. And each individual has a slightly different constellation, you know, that's unique to him. But your very existence demonstrates, my dear, that men don't always fit the stereotype. Not all men are like that, right? You're not. And that's okay.
And some combination of the five, depending on the day. There are no categorical, across-the-board differences between binary and non-binary trans people. Not pronouns, nor biology, nor lived experience. This is why I'm skeptical.
Wait a minute. So, if there is no identifiable definitional difference between the two categories of trans women, which, like, now we have, okay. Now we have come up with the binary and non-binary binary. My head. Anyway, so if there is no way to distinguish one group from the other, how in the world do you distinguish one group from the other? What are we talking about here?
Of attempts to sort us into any two categories. It'll always be at least a little immaterial.
Yeah, which again, life is sloppy like that and often doesn't fit into neat little boxes. But we do try. Don't we, Lily?
If a dividing line between binary and non-binary people can't be observed in nature, we have to draw it ourselves. So how do we draw that line? When we talk about binary trans people, how do we decide who counts?
So this line doesn't exist in nature, so we're just going to make it up. I mean, you know, humans are known for doing that. So, like, that on its face, fair enough, I guess. But, like, you're not giving us any reason to do this. You just said that there is no reason to do that. But let us proceed, I suppose, with the exercise nonetheless.
Because I don't think it's a self-reporting thing. It's pretty rare to come across someone who describes themselves as a binary trans person. This label is most often applied from the outside, sometimes with a negative connotation. So when...
Yes, other people will tend to judge you by the way you present yourself and how you behave. Like you guys didn't invent that.
we gender someone as a binary trans person, what cues are we looking for? I don't have data to back this up.
Okay, so what is a binary trans person? That would be a trans person who passes as well as their assumed gender, sex, whatever. We're going to conflate gender and sex several times and go back and forth, oscillate on that continuum as well before we're done. So be ready for that. A binary trans person is somebody who passes, basically.
Only experience and intuition, and I have no way to say how this works for trans masculine folks, but for trans femmes, I think it comes down to 4.
That's interesting because you haven't had any trouble in speaking for various categories so far, but not trans masculine people. They get extra deference. Oh, okay.
4 main things: using she/her pronouns, going by a female name, presenting as a feminine woman, and pursuing medical transition. If you make most or all of these choices in tandem, people tend to assume you're a woman, plain and simple, no bells or whistles. A glaring oversight of this categorization is that many of those in it don't identify as...
That sounded really simple. Well, I mean, not simple, but straightforward. That list of how to become a woman was pretty straightforward. Pronouns, female name, presenting feminine, and medical transition. I mean, so this person is a medicalist. Ooh. Which one of us is the turf, Lily? It depends on who you ask, I guess, considering that. Anyways, this list would seem fairly straightforward and, logically ordered and followable even. But...
plain and simple, no bells or whistles. A glaring oversight of this categorization is that many of those in it don't identify as binary at all. I know quite a few people who check most or all of these boxes, but don't identify as trans women. To group us all together based on our presentation and our bodies is to apply gendering in the same way as cisgender society does. And that means misgendering at least a few of us. Your transition might be understood as more traditional than your outwardly non-conforming peers, and therefore more socially acceptable. From here, people tend to read into your motives. Trans women...
Yes. Others are going to infer certain things about you based upon your actions. Yes. The justice system is built on the idea that you can judge someone for what they do. Society is built on that idea, that what you do does matter.
Women judged as binary are assumed to prioritize assimilation. After all, we must want to be the same as cis women if we're so hung up on copying them, right? To this end, the term binary trans people is sometimes used as a stand-in for conservatives or assimilationists, the Blair Whites and Buck Angels of the world, who make up a tiny sliver of the actual trans population. So it's not just privilege projected onto us, but also a political leaning. To be privileged is to be politically inferior, and repression itself is virtuous.
So you're complaining about the oppression Olympics, which, you were the one who brought that up. But, Lily, darling, you're so good at the hurdles. Tonight, in the Identity Decathlon, Lily Alexandre is going for the all-time record of the long jump in the category of covert narcissism.
Writer Alex V. Green noted a parallel online movement dubbed Tender Queers, which is also known to weaponize accusations of privilege against trans women.
By this point in 2020, the internet has thoroughly hammered into us that one's politics are a matter of personal identity, and that one's identity may itself stand in for their politics. So you cannot critique the tender queer, because they are queer, which means they are radical, and they are traumatized, which means they are a victim, and therefore that they are radical. And if you have an issue, that's your political failure, and so on.
Look at that, y'all. My sister is queer after all.
The idea that this constructed category of binary trans women is more privileged and therefore less radical. I understand where it comes from. It's true that there's something of a blueprint for trans feminine people to follow. Many of us do want to be treated the same as cis women. The kind of clear-cut transition goal that doesn't exist for the whole community. We've all heard the age-old question, how do you pass as non-binary? There's a frame of reference for us.
How do you identify someone as non-binary? Here we go.
In contrast, the relative newness of non-binary genders in the public eye seems revolutionary. A group whose very existence challenges ideas of what bodies can look like, what people can be. A group for which no fixed gender roles exist. And yeah, this is sick. Being non-binary is nonconformist and does pose some real challenges to the current system.
Ooh. Pat yourself on the back there, darling. Be careful not to break yourself. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. I don't know. I guess I'll check you for you because clearly no one else is. You know, I guess being non-binary is nonconformist. By definition, because it has no definition, you can't conform to something that doesn't exist. But it doesn't challenge the system. What are you talking about? Opting out of the system does not challenge that system. You know, bursting through the wall like the Kool-Aid man is not... blazing a revolutionary trail. It's just knocking a hole to get yourself where you want to be as quickly as possible.
But I think that's just as true of so-called binary trans people. I think transitioning at all is a total transgression of the gender binary. Uh-oh, we're doing theory. This will be easy to follow, don't worry.
So, all kinds of trans women are equally revolutionary. I mean, I suppose. In that I don't consider that to be revolutionary, you know. Insisting that you have to fall into the traditional masculine or feminine boxes, and anybody who doesn't has to be micro-categorized into oblivion is not necessary, hun.
Misogyny is rooted in the understanding of the sexes as immutable, natural, and mutually exclusive. Julia Serrano calls this oppositional sexism, as in opposite. Oppositional sexism holds that the differences between the genders are innate and have nothing to do with culture.
Okay, that sounds a lot like complementarianism, right? But with like a 90s girl power cover on it or something, to me anyway. But you know, Lily here is just being able to really even comprehend a lot of these more complex concepts. So, you know, Julia Serrano's book has been around her whole life. And I'm sure it feels very foundational. I've never read it, but I don't need to. I've watched the stand-up performance. And I've heard it quoted, seen it quoted in a million articles and videos, just like this.
Therefore, if some disparity exists between the genders, it's nothing to worry about because it's perfectly natural. You can see right away how this would help with patriarchy. If men...
Yes, and I can also see right away how that might be a good thing. If something is perfectly natural and nothing to worry about, that almost sounds like encouragement. But, you know, we can interpret things both ways, I suppose.
Are harassing women on the street, it's because they just can't help themselves. If women aren't graduating with as many STEM degrees, it's because women just aren't interested in science. It's clear how oppositional sexism should govern cis people. They're who the gender by...
It's clear how it should govern cis people. Cisgendering is misgendering, huh? Dang. To call someone cis is to say that they identify... To call a woman cis is to say that she identifies with her oppression. That she, you know, embodies it naturally and effortlessly, organically, and just fuck the hell out of that.
Binary was designed around, but transsexuals throw a real wrench in the works. How can you claim that sex is immutable when we're right here?
You didn't change your sex, hun. That is what she's claiming. He, she, whatever. Lily. That's what Lily is claiming here. That her existence proves that sex is not a binary. Sex. Keep that in mind.
When you claim that men are naturally competitive, dominant, and hairy, while also insisting people like me are men, our existence calls into question oppositional sexism's core claim.
Again, just because some individuals fall outside of the generalized cluster that we would consider masculine behavior, all that, you know, that doesn't make them women. All that does is prove that some men fall outside that cluster. That such diversity exists. You exist. Why isn't that enough?
Claim that the gender binary is natural and that what is natural is good. Our success in crossing the gender divide proves it was never impossibly wide to begin with.
Now we're talking about gender, though. Say, a minute ago, his existence, her existence, Lily's existence proved that sex is not a binary. And now she's talking about having changed genders, using them synonymously all of a sudden, right? It's wild, wild stuff, right?
The same essay I quoted earlier, Susan Stryker revels in the unnaturality of her body and the way it terrifies cis society.
This is great.
I, who have dwelt in a form unmatched with my desire. I, whose flesh has become an assemblage of incongruous anatomical parts. I, who achieve the similitude of a natural body only through an unnatural process. I offer you this warning. The nature you bedevil me with is a lie. Do not trust it to protect.
Nature is a lie. Wow. That is a lie. Like, obviously. That's a 1984, we've always been at war with East Asia, or whatever level, lie. Oh, and it won't be the last one that we see either. Nature is a lie. This is what they're trying to convince, to sell to everyone. And sell is a very operative word. We're going to get into the capitalist stuff here in just a minute.
Protect you from what I represent, for it is a fabrication that cloaks the groundlessness of the privilege you seek to maintain for yourself at my expense.
Okay, so you have surpassed nature and soared above it to the great, amazing, just heights where you're at, where you can see all, right? And you understand everything better than us plebs down here who still believe in nature, but somehow we do that at your expense. You who have surpassed everything. Are you hero or victim? You need to choose one. All right, guys and dudes, are you ready? Because right here, in my little corner of the internet, on the Brazen She Rants channel, we are about to see this poor, confused, non-binary person is about to misgender themselves. Their self.
When people talk about so-called binary trans women as if they're old-fashioned conformists, I wonder if they miss this? How we're the object of such fear and disgust. How medically transitioning undermines the foundation of the gender binary, which is the sex binary. This is a fundamental difference between cis women and trans women.
So, now sex and gender are the same thing again. But, except that, you keep acting as if they aren't. Moving right along, though.
Cis women existing doesn't by itself undermine the gender binary.
I don't know. I think that has a lot to do with the way we choose to exist. Like, cis women undermine the gender binary all the time by doing things that people, most often men, tell us that we can't do. It happens every day. Especially, around these parts where it's illegal to, kidnap and murder us for the offense.
And let me tell you, being perceived as a threat to gender, not a great time.
True. My sympathy's there for you, darling. Obviously, something has got you all in a tizzy. And this whole binary thing really, really, really seems to bother you a lot. And life is hard. No joke. It is. And, I'm not... I hope that what you've got going on there is going well for you. Truly. I do. It's just... This is not the healthy way to deal with these things, hon.
Can't say I'm a fan. Let's return to those 4 choices from earlier. The ones people use to assume you're a binary trans woman. Using she, her pronouns, going by a female name, presenting as a feminine woman, and...
Well, that's fun. That's just a black screen.
In fact, most of my material struggles on the gender front have stemmed from one of these 4 things.
Material struggles. Because that's what this video is about. Is how all trans women share material struggles. I guess, as a general thesis, would you say that's fair? Except that there's, no way to identify who is who, and material struggles don't actually define anything. I don't know. Let's go.
If becoming a woman was normative, wouldn't it be easier? It was really fucking hard to get on hormones.
Fuck you. Becoming a woman is fucking hard. If it were normative. What does that word mean exactly? It doesn't mean normal, because then they would just say normal. I understand what normalize means. It means to make something normal. Okay. I don't know. This is one of a couple of words that she uses throughout the video that are ill-defined.
As a teenager. Even in Canada, with allegedly universal healthcare, there's no widespread protocol to help trans youth access hormones. At least there wasn't 5 years ago. So I had
5 years ago, when this person was a teenager,
to navigate this confusing healthcare system mostly alone or with friends who were just as lost as I was. The only reason I got a prescription at all is because I lied to the clinic about my age.
Whoa. Again, you heard it here first. Right here on Brazen Cheat Rants. Lied to the clinic about his age as a teenager and was given hormones. So that's a thing.
In Minecraft. Satire.
And Lily knows it too, right?
Considering the category of binary trans woman is constructed around these choices, it's odd that those inside are deemed privileged. In transitioning and living as women, the challenge we present to oppositional sexism makes us the targets of a lot of vitriol.
Right. That's why people treat you funny. Because you challenged this half-made-up concept by Julia Serrano 20 years ago. No.
It's the reason they put up barriers to medical transition and try to keep us out of single-gendered spaces. They want so desperately for the male-female distinction to mean something.
Because it does. And there's single-sex spaces. Here, watch this. This is great.
And try to keep us out of single-gendered spaces. They want so desperately for the male-female distinction to mean something, and it just doesn't.
It just does, though. It's called reproduction, the continuation of the species. Whether or not a female has children, our hypothetical maternity is enough. We might have access to and control over the next generation. That is enough, for the patriarchy to not let us wander too far.
The power struggle at the core of trans femininity, and that struggle is against the gender binary.
Now, the struggle that you're sensing there at the core of trans femininity would be us pushing back at you, pushing back on this whole thing, because they're single sex spaces and they belong to us for good reason. And, you're clearly upset by something, and I'm sure that, things have been rough for you. It's rough for everyone to varying degrees, and just, yeah. You're not entitled to all of this, and you assume that you are because you believe it. Well, life is a bitch, Lily, my dear.
When I look back on my transition, back to that 16-year-old coming out to her family and classmates, I still get a pit in my stomach. I'm really grateful she pushed on and insisted on being seen, but in crossing...
Okay. More, stuff that's about her, but not about her. Moving on.
Brace yourselves, I got a scalding hot take coming in here.
Ooh.
The thing about transphobia is... it doesn't happen to cis people, usually. And that's kind of a big deal, because transphobia has a huge impact on what...
Transphobia doesn't happen to cis people usually? How could transphobia ever possibly happen to a cis person? If that is possible, then trans misogyny is not a thing, because they are either treating you like a woman, or they're treating you like they think you're crazy.
My gender means for my everyday life.
So we just could never understand you.
Trans women. It assumes trans feminine people experience womanhood in the same way as cis women, but that's actually not the case.
Then what are you experiencing exactly? Being treated like you're soft in the head and wearing dresses? Yeah. Whatever. We're going to go on here in a minute to explain why even, all cis women don't experience womanhood the same way, and why that makes it not a thing.
I talked about this extensively in my video Girls Own the Void, so I won't retread too much here. But basically, many people don't want us to be women, so there's a pretty narrow set of behaviors that's socially acceptable for us. And
now they're going to misgender their self Again,
I resent the assumption that so-called binary trans people's genders are simpler than our non-binary counterparts.
our non-binary counterparts. Which one are we again? I thought, a couple of minutes ago we had the big announcement that you're actually non-binary and have been for some time. I'm so confused.
We all live such multifaceted lives, with different parts of our identities clashing with one another. According to traditional values, even the most milquetoast trans woman is a walking heap of contradiction.
Ooh. So, revolutionary just by existing. Keep that in mind too.
People who wish harm on trans women don't care if we identify as trans women or not, because they don't think it's up to us.
It isn't. I didn't choose to be born female. I didn't choose to be born at all. But here we are. Life's a bitch. And then you die. Right? Being female requires a lot of adjustment. And I feel like by the time you finally get any good at it, you're about done. C'est la vie. I'm sorry that, you're struggling with it like this. I really am. This is not the way to deal with it, hun.
Any outward expression of femininity, any move away from maleness, is seen as a personal failure. That's rarely the case for cis women.
Actually, I feel like that totally is the case for cis women. We're definitely encouraged to butch it up, as it were. Any, most things are coded masculine at this point because they've just sort of assimilated the entire world under their purview, right? But the few things that they haven't managed to be better at than us, that remain coded feminine, anything like that you have in your personality or in your past is to be abandoned and ashamed of, embarrassed about. Right?
The binary is something we're subjected to, whether or not we're willing participants.
Yep. Material reality is like that. It just comes at you fast and heavy and does not give a shit how you feel about that. Grow up.
This is why I'm increasingly identifying as genderqueer. It's not that I'm not a woman in some way, but that my gender...
You're not a woman. I don't know that you're a boy, that you're not a woman. By most measures of the word. And I guess maybe that is why you're identifying as non-binary, genderqueer. Do those two things mean the same thing? Because you clearly said you were non-binary. Now we've just said genderqueer, right?
This is why I'm increasingly identifying as genderqueer.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not a woman in some way, but that my gender means a lot of freaky, confusing things because I'm queer. Maybe...
Boy, it's definitely freaky and confusing. That is true. But queer is another one of those words that's ill-defined here. These are important words that carry a lot of weight in these arguments that just, what does queer mean? I know I'm getting old, but I know that it doesn't mean gay anymore. And that wouldn't make sense here anyway. So what does it mean? Just weird? That, you don't fit into any of these categories that you're, just waxing on and on about for half an hour? Is that what that means?
In a perfectly equal world, I would just be a woman.
No, in a perfectly equal world, you would just be a boy, a man, a dude. You could be the femmiest femboy who ever femmed. And that would be okay. Because again, you prove that not all men are like that. You're living it right now. That doesn't make you not male.
But in this messy, four-dimensional society, with my hair short, my junk man made, and my planet fucking dying, it's not so simple anymore.
Create, manage.
There are other factors that hugely impact what we expect of a woman,
Yeah.
and her ability to conform to gender roles. So many factors alter what your gender means in your life. Your
Like
religion,
what?
its rules might ask you to dress or behave a certain way. Your nationality and your culture. It might be hard for you to access education. Your health and disability. Disabled women are frequently degendered. I can't get pregnant, and that's basically what this whole gender was defined around.
Gosh, that all sounds like a lot of material conditions that affect your experience. I wonder what might be good for talking about that. What sort of analysis? What might one use to discuss material things? I just can't imagine.
Does a white North American woman have the same gender as a retiree in Morocco or a schoolgirl in Indonesia? We might all call ourselves the same thing, but in terms of what that gender means, I'm not so sure. With that in mind,
I don't like that at all. So, this is one of the things that worries me the most, actually, is this idea that we're all just going to end up discreetly tucked away in our own personal little gender boxes, where no one is in the same category. No one is in the same group. There is no cohesion. And therefore, no one is going to be able to unify to affect change to any of these material conditions on a large scale, like you would clearly be in favor of. And this kind of confusion, is just making us wait even longer.
and can we call any woman, any individual, binary?
That's a strange thing to call anyone, really. I'm so sick of that word now. And, up until a few years ago, I feel like I had never used it in this context, ever. Oh, there's so much to cover. But, can any woman be called binary? She's about to tell us that no woman really fits the stereotype. Which, duh! It's a stereotype. That doesn't mean that the cluster of traits that forms the concept of what a woman is and who a woman is does not exist. Because we do. Hi there.
The more I think about it, the less it makes sense to. Looking at the divergent experiences of women all across the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Clearly, the more you're thinking, the less it's making sense because you're going in the wrong direction.
It seems out of touch to call womanhood a monolithic experience. The idea of individual women as binary seems to run up against intersectionality.
Okay. And here we're going to get into the race stuff. But real quick, having unique and varied experiences because of your different material conditions is not proof that women do not exist.
Especially when you consider who wields the power to include or exclude people from that group. Who defines the archetypal binary woman?
It's going to be white people. Spoiler alert.
Say it with me now. It's white people. In a North American context, binary womanhood. White women are viewed as the purest, most natural ideal of womanhood, to which all other women must be compared.
Point of order. Speaking as arguably one of the whitest of white women, I don't conform to standards of beauty in our culture. I'm too short. I'm too chubby. I'm too broad-chested, and my hips are too big. My butt is too big. I'm covered in spots, blemishes. I had to accept a long time ago that I was never going to meet those beauty standards. Okay. My era, it was that I was never going to look like Daryl Hannah. Okay. I did get the mermaid hair. I should show it to you sometime. But other than that, no. No, she's gorgeous, and I've had to accept long ago that I will never, ever, ever be 6 feet tall and blonde. It's just not going to happen. I don't even know of any surgery. You know what? I'm going to do it. The point remains. Reality is a bitch, but accepting it and working within it is the way to move forward with your life instead of getting stuck in these little eddies and these little tangents and these little whirlpools that you just seem to be swimming around in circles in all the time.
The experiences of white women are rarely acknowledged as specific to us. Instead, they're treated as the default.
Us. There. Now she's a white woman. Okay. Even though this whole video, half of the point of this video is to talk about how she's really non-binary and what little difference that actually makes.
In The Excellent Women, Race, and Class, Angela Davis contextualizes the cultural divide between white and black women as it first emerged during the slave trade and then widened during the Industrial Revolution. Proportionately, more black women have always worked outside their homes than their white.
Proportionally. More women in poverty may be black, and I am not about to sit here and try and tell black women their experience. However, there are and always have been poor white women, and there certainly are now wealthy black women. Okay? Because these are clusters of traits and arguably concepts that are built on material observations. Okay? But just because one or two people fall outside of that main cluster of traits does not mean that that concept is defunct and proven to not be useful.
White sisters. The slave system defined black people as chattel. Since women, no less than men, were viewed as profitable labor units, they may as well have been genderless as far as the slaveholders were concerned.
And not to tell them about their experience, but I'm not sure that I buy that because, well, for one thing, white women were sold for dowries, okay, treated as brood mares. You know, women been executed for having the wrong sex baby. Not just that one famous lady. Like, it happened to more than one person. The one would be more than enough, obviously. Wow, right? And never mind the fact that your husband could always just abandon you if he decided he didn't like you or whatever. And you would just be fucked. Destitute. Because you're not a legal person. You're a stray cow. And that was true of white women too, for centuries. Additionally, black women are still women and possess that unique trait of being able to create more people, which I just cannot imagine that slaveholders would have overlooked.
As the ideology of femininity, a byproduct of industrialization, was popularized and disseminated through the new ladies' magazines and romantic novels, white women came to be seen as inhabitants of a sphere totally severed from the realm of productive work.
Wealthy women who, you know, I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with this, funnily enough, but I've been told that the majority of wealthy people throughout most of history were white. You know, most of Western history were white. Okay. And that seems to me to have been a complete coincidence. And you cannot say whether a different group yeah. No one can say whether any other group of people, given the same circumstances, would have behaved the same way. Thank goodness we're never going to get to test that out, hopefully. Right? But white people had the wealth, and the wealth was what enabled them to behave so badly. And if you're going to say that it's something inherent to white people, then that's either white supremacy, because white men conquered the world, or I've actually met people who believe that white people were inherently evil for the same reason. Because again, you can interpret things, you know, whichever way, right?
The cleavage between the home and the public economy, brought on by industrial capitalism, established female inferiority more firmly than ever before. Woman became synonymous in the prevailing propaganda with mother and housewife, and both mother and housewife.
Wait a minute. So, is this saying that woman and mother became synonymous in the 19th century? That is absurd. Before the 19th century, mother was about all you got. That part was just assumed. That was what you would do with your life. It wasn't until the 19th century when women got to go to college, become educated professionals of any other kind. Like, this is so backwards. And I don't necessarily want to try to tell black women about their experience or their history, but if the rest of this quote is backwards as this, we're in trouble.
For the fatal mark of inferiority. But among black female slaves, this vocabulary was nowhere to be found. The economic arrangements of slavery contradicted the hierarchical sexual roles incorporated in the new ideology. As
the new ideology of the existence of women? This is weird, wild stuff, guys and dudes.
The dehumanization of women of color is often coupled with a systematic degendering. Consider how dark skin is understood as masculine, and skin lightening creams are mostly sold to women. A great deal of racism has been enacted in the name of protecting this innocent white ideal.
Okay. But I just don't think that all skin lightening creams and that whole thing is all about white women. Okay. I think that some of that, I'm far from an expert here, but it seems to me that in a lot of Asian countries that have never really assimilated to Western values or culture, good for them, maintaining their own identity, which they've managed to do, a lot of them, they're not lightening their skin to try and look like white women. They're lightening their skin because pale skin means you don't work. It means you're rich.
Not least against women of color deemed too masculine. Consider the dozens of cisgender women of color who've been shut out of professional sports on account of hyperandrogenism, meaning their testosterone levels are higher than normal for women.
I can only assume that this is a reference to that Caster Semenya, forgive my pronunciation, person from South Africa who, I haven't looked into that deeply enough to render my personal verdict on the matter, but that one looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, if you know what I mean.
It's a kind of tacit degendering that I find really gross, telling trans women of color that they can be women, but they'll never be the feminine ideal.
I'm pretty sure I just said that about myself a few minutes ago. Oh no, you'll never be an ideal. Well, as we'll discuss here in a minute, ideals are not achievable goals.
I think the image of the binary trans woman erases women of color because ascribing them privilege on the basis of being binary reveals the absurdity of basing these conversations about privilege on identity and not on conditions.
I'm not exactly sure how you think that works, but yes, basing discussions about material issues on how you feel inside does not work. That is very true.
Arguing that there is one coherent monolithic womanhood and that trans women conform to it lends immense power to whoever gets to define what that womanhood is.
Right. And it's the white people, right? Don't look at the rich. Blame the white people. Even white people blame the white people. Because it's okay. Look at you. You're not white. You're non-binary. You're oppressed.
Of course, none of this takes away from the importance of organizing as women for women.
And how are you supposed to do that? Like, non-binary trans women can be anyone. Right? You can't even define them. How do you identify them, to gather them together, to ask them how they want to do things? Much less regular women. Oh, sorry. Cis women.
Across these diverse experiences, there are tons of common threads: objectification, lack of agency, economic repression.
But that's not how we're defining woman, surely. Feminism really needs to have more to say on this topic. I have a blog about it. I touch on it in several blogs, actually. Because how in the world is defining who and what women are not feminism's big thing?
Across cultures, women tend to be oppressed for similar reasons. The takeaway here isn't that gender is fake, so we don't need feminism.
Across all times and places in recorded history, women have been oppressed because we might become mothers. Hypothetical motherhood has been enough to justify keeping us out of education and professions and from owning property and da-da-da-da-da-da. All the way back into, the Iron Age and probably before that. It's great stuff.
We do. We absolutely do.
Oh, we do. Yeah,
we need feminism to treat womanhood as a singular or simple experience. Understanding the diversity of our experiences makes feminism stronger.
But we don't. We don't understand the diversity of women's experiences. Hell, modern medicine doesn't even understand the diversity of women's bodies. And that's a failure of feminism, period. Right? Only we can speak up for us. And we have women doctors now. Why in the world have some more of these problems not been solved. But anyway.
How does the other side of this divide, the non-binary camp, define itself? And where does this urge to separate us come from in the first place?
Very valid questions. One of which is not really going to get answered, and the other of which is going to be, spoiler alert, capitalism. Ooh, because suddenly wealth matters. All right, let's see if we can try to define non-binary people.
The non-binary community, when distinguishing itself from the broader trans community, positions itself as a counterculture, pushing back not only against broader cis society, but also what's viewed as the trans old guard. Inclusion is a core tenet of many non-binary spaces. Whether you're on hormones or not, whether you've changed your name or your pronouns or not, you're welcome to join in. That said, in defining itself apart from the broader trans community, many non-binary circles have built an image of their community as specifically non-medicalized.
And I guess that might be a reason for the capitalist machine to be interested in them, right? An untapped market. Ooh.
I've sometimes even run into an outright disdain for medical transition. This is where the old transsexual v transgender divide reemerges.
Well, when you get a bunch of people together who are just a bunch of insecure covert narcissists, yes, it's very easy to divide and conquer and make them feel like other people are, maybe not as good as they thought, and play purity politics. That person disagrees with you on this one key point. Therefore, you shouldn't associate with them. And guilt by association. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
Cultural image is pretty flawed. A huge amount of non-binary people do medically transition.
From what to what? I don't understand. I thought that non-binary people had stepped outside the binary, thus becoming non-binary. So, what are you transitioning from or to? That makes no sense.
But this image is less concerned with them, or I guess I could say us. Those who medically transition.
Us. Non-binary people. The level of confusion. The level of cognitive dissonance where just, one hand is ignoring what the other hand is doing. Which you really should probably check that because it's showing your ass.
I can't tell you how many posts I've seen going around over the years that say something along the lines of, you don't have to change your hair or your makeup or your outfits or your name or your pronouns or your body to be trans. And this is true. And in the context of the trans community, that might seem like a radical statement.
The clothes do not make the man. You've heard of this? No? It's an old saying. Yeah. An oldie but a goodie. And,
But in mainstream society, you don't need to transition is the default opinion. Medical transition isn't something.
That's true, isn't it? It's almost as if non-binary is not a thing.
Despite positioning itself as more radical, it seems like this tendency might actually have fewer demands than the trans mainstream. Concrete goals take a backseat to abstract ideals with no win states, like empowerment and visibility. These are respectable goals, for sure, but they're not actionable in a wide way.
That's true. Because they're ideals, which are abstract in their very nature, and unattainable in material reality, which is where we live, in a material world. Oi. My brain is a giant jukebox. Welcome to my world. But anyway. Oh, you evil thing. We're still getting to know each other. Okay. What were we talking about?
Like empowerment and visibility. These are respectable goals, for sure, but they're not actionable in a wide way because they respond to individual problems and not collective ones. I wonder why this might be.
No, because they're not real. Ideals are ideals. They're a perfect concept of a goal, which will never be reached. Perfection is not possible. Because entropy is eternal? I don't know exactly why that is, but perfection, it's never going to happen. You're always going to, burp or lose your balance or something. Because you're human, and that's okay.
Look, We all knew it was coming. I would say I'm sorry, but I'm not. I live for this shit. Capitalism has dug its talons into every corner of online space at this point, and the queer community is no exception. It's an unfortunate...
Yeah, okay. That's all true, obviously. And Lily is about to say a lot of stuff that is actually pretty important and I can't disagree with about that thing that she just said, how, capitalism has its fingers in everyone's pie and is slowly poisoning us all. Yes.
The people shaping the beliefs of millions of queer youth worldwide rely on advertisers to make a living. To keep their appeal broad and their videos monetized, queer and trans influencers have a real incentive to appear somewhat outside the mainstream without majorly disrupting the status quo.
Okay, that's been true of all media activism since the beginning of media. I remember hearing that same critique as a kid. They look, edgy, but they're only as edgy as their corporate parents will let them be. This isn't news.
This is the contradiction at the core of social media activism.
This is the contradiction at the core of all media activism. Okay, now this concept coming up is actually very important, and I noticed it long before I heard this word, but it's very useful.
Radical ideas are inactivated by capital in a process called recuperation. In recuperation, an idea is rebranded and diluted to the point where it means essentially nothing, but it maintains its appealing radical veneer.
Like feminism, right?
The ideas can then be sold back to us, allowing us to perform radicalism not by taking action, but by consuming a product.
Right. Our lives are commodified and sold back to us. That's how capitalism is slowly eating the world. And, it occurs to me that this sort of strange narcissism that's being bred into people somehow and just nurtured in this sort of environment, in this sort of thinking, makes a person very vulnerable to all kinds of just, ego stroking and carrot and stick of, validation sort of thing. Manipulation. It leaves you open to being very easily manipulated.
This twisting of trans advocacy is necessary in order to sell it, both to corporations and a wide audience.
All culture is slowly being twisted this way. Because all culture is slowly being eaten up by this thing that just wants to commodify it and sell it back to us. And double dip off us. To charge us for our own shit. And burn up the planet in the process. Capitalism is bad. Yes. But capitalism is, it is in the way that I just described, sort of responsible for your situation, but not in the way that you think. And they're not the ones who keep you looking for that external enemy, that outgroup, that them, to define the us by. This us versus them. Yeah. The level of personal. You need to get beyond that.
There's a pretty narrow subset of trans experiences that are naturally ad-friendly. I don't know how...
I feel like that's true for any identity. Come on.
This is where the cultural image comes in. In encouraging a monolithic cultural image of the non-binary person, a definitive what non-binary looks like, brands can encircle non-binary people as a new consumer class.
So wait a minute. Didn't you just tell us a little while ago about how the Industrial Revolution invented the concept of women? Which, as absurd as that sounds, now you're suggesting that women as a group don't exist at all.
How do you sell to a group of 1 million people, some of whom have nothing in common? This is where the cultural image comes in. In encouraging a monolithic cultural image of the non-binary person, right, a definitive what non-binary looks like, brands can encircle non-binary people as a new consumer class.
That is what has been done to every group on Earth. And now they got y'all inventing ones for them. New target demographics. Y'all, you invented it yourself. You said it yourself.
They can try to convince us that existing is radical and purchasing is radical.
Well, you seem to be fairly convinced that existing is radical as long as you do it right. and you're dead set on figuring out what that is. Good luck to you. Yeah, hell, if your revolution succeeds, theoretically it'll benefit everyone, right? Because it will be inclusive of all. Despite the fact that that makes the concept of inclusiveness meaningless, because if there's no one out, then being in doesn't mean anything.
But having material needs is regressive. So they push to dilute terms like visibility, empowerment, and revolution.
Right, having physical needs sure is a pain in the ass. Right? Physical embodiment really is a drag. I hear that. But you want to talk about diluting terms. Terms like the word woman, for example.
Into near meaninglessness. Good ideas for communal action. Distorted into individual choices you can make to feel radical.
Yeah.
They're selling us complacency. Alex B. Green and Beware the Tenderqueer put it better than I could.
Social media is a marketplace, and the people on it.
I don't give a shit about this. This quote does nothing for me. This is where the big money is, right here.
Good ideas for communal action. Distorted into individual choices you can make to feel radical. They're selling us complacency.
They're selling us complacency. Yes. And you've bought in hook, line, and sinker. How much money did you spend? You know, you sound Canadian, so maybe it was the state's money. Did you spend on the surgery and those hormones? How much time and energy of your life have you devoted to an identity which doesn't even have a defining factor to it? An identity that can't be identified. What?
The capitalist version of empowerment serves to placate us, not compel us to make a change.
That's right. Placate you into navel gazing and refining your personal identity. Getting right with the Lord or whatever. It's all kind of the same thing because it's all in your head. It does not actually affect your material conditions whatsoever. That would be the placating you're talking about. That would be the distraction you're talking about. That would be the lack of material progress that you're describing. You're in it.
To convince us that we don't need to tear the system down. We can find happiness inside it.
Yeah. As long as you find the right place inside it, right? Because we don't need to redefine what it means to be a woman or redefine what it means to be a man to include you. No. We'll just come up with a whole new label. That'll be outside the system, right? No. Because defining yourself in reaction or in opposition to something is still defining yourself by that thing. It's extremely frustrating to watch Lily bring up all these really salient points and then misinterpret them so poorly, so badly, just so egregiously. Misinterpret all of this. And this is really the cherry on the sundae. Here we go.
Because it is so close to getting it. Like, yes, your existence as a trans person is subversive and badass, and you should keep it up. But what?
By its very nature, right? Subversive. Maybe not revolutionary, but subversive just by existing. Right?
Why is it so controversial? What systems keep it that way? And what can we do to dismantle those systems? On its own, an identity doesn't do all that much.
There it is. Yes, that's true. Isn't it? On its own, an identity doesn't really do all that much because it does not materially exist. In order to interact with the material world, you have to have a material form, and your identity does not. It's a reflection of your experience on various levels, and da-da-da-da. We could probably philosophize about that forever. And it looks like you guys are pretty dead set on that, huh? It really stinks, because I'd really like to move on to actually, talking about some of these material conditions that you keep mentioning.
I'm sorry, Aiden from Oakville, Ontario, but your existence is not an active revolution. We are all literally just some guy.
You are. That Freudian slip was so strong I almost fell. You're just some guy. And that's okay. is you demonstrate that guys like you exist. Whew, there we go. And that's a great thing.
I'm expecting to hear that I stepped out of my lane on this one, and I want to get ahead of that. If this video does a tenth of the numbers as my Mogai video, I'm sure I'll get lots of comments calling me enby-phobic.
Little humble brag there. But of course, most of the video has been a humble brag. Right? Because, boy, I learned a lot about this person watching this, didn't you? Fascinating stuff.
Saying I'm erasing the most vulnerable members of our community. Look, I know it doesn't feel good to be erased, but in depriving us of gender self-determination, in sorting us neatly into this new binary, a lot of people are being erased, and I'm one of them.
Gosh, that must suck. Having your identity erased. Even though it is indefinable and unidentifiable. But having that erased must suck. Because I'm a member of that extinct species known as women, who are being erased from language and law right now. So this really, the fact that you have created a new category that doesn't exist, and then are talking about being erased, that is just real rich. That's funny. Good job.
People have pigeonholed me into the binary trans woman label, despite me never identifying that way. I'm not going to hold back on talking about it.
You absolutely have identified that way. You did it several times just in this video. We all saw it.
Just because it goes against the norm set by people with a lot less to lose. This constructed ideal of non-binary people as non-medicalized, non-transitioning, and radical in name alone fails all of us. That's why I wrote this video to begin with.
Yeah. You wrote this video because of how non-binary you are. Even though you have identified as, a trans woman several times. Which is fine. Whatever. I'm not here to argue with you personally about how you personally identify. I don't know you. Far be it for me to tell you how to live your life, but I will tell you that this is not healthy. I understand reality is a bitch. But puberty is hard for everyone, hun. We're all traumatized. And this is not how you deal with it. This is not the healthy way to deal with it. You keep talking about how this binary doesn't matter, but it sure seems to matter a lot to you because we've been talking about it for 36 minutes. And anyway, if that binary doesn't exist, why did you do all this? If it doesn't matter to you, what are we talking about? Why did you need to do anything to yourself?
We don't need a monolithic ideal of womanhood to advocate for women. Surely we don't need a monolithic ideal of non-binary people to advocate for non-binary people. We can look to the common threads of material struggle, rejection from friends and family.
Okay. Looking to common material threads is, first of all, defining features, which you started out this video as saying that non-binary trans women, as close to definition as we've gotten, don't have. That's what makes them non-binary, right? But one of the things. And, again, going back to material reality as your reference, really sort of takes the focus off the gender feels, doesn't it? That's not going to go over real well.
Feeling like there's no place for you in your culture. These are things that nearly all trans people face.
I've definitely felt that. I guess back in the day, I had my share of what would be called dysphoria as well, but I never really connected the two.
Across genders, we have immensely more in common than we do separating us. So please don't take this video as my saying binary trans people are oppressed and non-binary people are privileged. My whole point is that the distinction between the two is totally immaterial and accomplishes nothing.
But you've spent the last 20 minutes humoring it and expounding upon it. I'm confused because you're confused. It accomplishes nothing except what she's about to say here.
Capital has a much easier time conquering this community if we've already divided ourselves.
And that's true of every community. And that's what's happening in every community. Is that, this self-righteousness is being nurtured. And that makes people vulnerable to manipulation. With ego stroking. Okay. like the hamster being, taught to go for the pellets instead of the food. Well said.
I think I'm going to take a break from the gender stuff for a while. It's easy to write about, and I'm glad it resonates with so many people, but it is really starting to wear at me.
It's easy to write about because you're making it up as you go along. And your gut feeling is the only thing to tell you whether you're right or wrong. So, except it's so bizarre because that kind of strength in faith is just not a feature of this at all, is it? I don't blame you wanting to take a break. I sure wish I could. I sure wish I could just forget about all this weird gender stuff and move on to actually confronting any of the many, many material issues that are just constantly degrading and breaking down all around us. That would be really nice. Your movement has decided to make that impossible for now. Because people like me are stuck fighting for our legal recognition in the first fucking place. So go ahead, take your break. Enjoy. Really, I hope you enjoy your break. I hope you enjoy your break so much that you wander off and find something else to do with your life. Ugh. Okay, I think we've got it now. Thanks so much for sticking with me all this time. I really feel that this one was worth it. I always feel that they're worth it. I really try and choose just the most special gems for our little garden corner discussions. and there's just so much material in this one. That's why we're, running long here tonight. I just really thank you for sticking with me. Like the video if you enjoyed this. Subscribe to the channel and support my hard-working self over at my Patreon. I will buy more goodies and make us just the neatest little garden patio you ever saw for us to relax on together while we go through some of this stuff, because it's important for us to all understand this. And we're going to get through it together. Thanks so much. I'm Sarah, and I'm going to go find more stuff to bitch about. See you soon. Bye.